The sound of the door slamming echoed through the small house like a gunshot. Beatrice Williams, 70 years old, stood frozen near the kitchen table, her hands trembling. Her daughter Megan had already stepped into the waiting taxi. "Mom, they're yours now," Megan said flatly, without turning around. Before Beatrice could respond, the car pulled away, disappearing down the street. Just like that, Megan was gone. Behind Beatrice, 6 pairs of frightened eyes watched silently. Ethan, only 10, held the baby tightly in his arms, trying to calm her soft cries. Sophia, 8 years old, broke the silence. "Grandma, where did Mommy go?" Beatrice's chest tightened. She looked at the children, her grandchildren, then at the folded letter left behind on the table. Her hand shook as she picked it up. Inside were a few careless lines explaining that Megan needed freedom and a new life. On the counter sat Beatrice's wallet. Inside, $50. That was all she had to survive the next 2 weeks. And now she had 7 mouths to feed. The children's quiet sobs pulled her back to reality. Beatrice opened her arms. "Come here, my loves." One by one, the children rushed into her embrace. She wrapped them tightly, her thin arms somehow holding all of them at once. Love, she realized, had a strange way of growing when everything else was taken away. "Are they going to split us up?" Ethan asked softly. His voice carried a weight no 10-year-old should bear. Beatrice met his eyes just like his late father's. "No," she said firmly. "No one is taking you away, I promise." "You swear?" little Charlotte whispered. "I swear on my life," Beatrice replied, crossing herself, "and on your father's soul." That night, dinner was whatever Beatrice could find. Watery noodles, old bread, canned beans. The children ate quietly, glancing at the door as if hoping their mother would return and say it was all a mistake. She never did. After putting the children to bed, 3 squeezed into each room, Beatrice sat alone in the dim kitchen. The peeling walls and unpaid bills seemed to close in on her. She was 70 years old. She was supposed to be resting, not starting over. Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding baby Ava. "I couldn't sleep," he whispered. "Neither could I," she replied. She pulled him close. "I need you to be strong, Ethan, stronger than you ever have to be." He would be there. He would help. His words broke her heart and strengthened it at the same time. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Inside that small house, something else was forming, a promise forged in fear and love. Beatrice whispered a prayer she'd known since childhood and stood up. Tomorrow she would find food. The next day, a way forward. She didn't know how, but she knew one thing: she would never leave them. A 70-year-old, Beatrice believed she had seen everything life could take from her. She was wrong. The real battle, and the miracle, was only just beginning. Morning arrived far too quickly. The pale sunlight slipped through the worn curtains, landing on Beatrice's tired face. She hadn't slept, not really. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Megan walking away, heard the door slam, felt the crushing weight of responsibility settle deeper onto her chest. Beatrice rose quietly and moved to the kitchen. Breakfast had to happen no matter how empty the pantry looked. She poured the last of the oats into a pot and added water instead of milk. A small spoon of brown sugar was all she could spare. When Ethan entered the kitchen, already dressed for school, Beatrice noticed his pants were too short and his shoes barely holding together. "Morning, Grandma," he said, forcing a smile. "Morning, my brave boy." One by one, the children gathered around the table. They stared at the thin oatmeal without complaint, but Beatrice could see the disappointment in their eyes. They missed the warm breakfasts their mother used to make. They missed normal. "Is Mommy coming back today?" little Liam asked softly. Beatrice paused, then headed her head gently. "She needs time, sweetheart." She hated lying, but the truth would only wound them deeper. After breakfast came chaos, searching for shoes, brushing hair, breaking up small arguments. Beatrice's knees protested with every step, reminding her she was no longer young. But there was no room for weakness now. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up. Buses roared past, street vendors shouted, and the city moved forward without caring that one elderly woman was barely holding her world together. Beatrice walked the older children to school, carrying Ava on her hip. Every block felt longer than the last. "We're going to be okay, Grandma," Sophia said, squeezing her hand. Beatrice smiled, but inside, fear whispered loudly. After dropping the children off, Beatrice stopped in front of the grocery store. She opened her wallet and stared at the money inside. $50. 14 days. 7 people. The math didn't work. The world spun and she leaned against the wall, holding Ava tightly. "Mrs. Williams?" Beatrice looked up to see her neighbor, Mr. Harrison, a thin, kind-faced man in his late 70s who had lived alone since his wife passed years ago. "I heard what happened," he said gently. "How are the kids?" Beatrice's composure shattered. "I don't know how I'm going to do this," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I'm too old. I don't have enough money. I don't—" Mr. Harrison placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, and you're not alone." She wanted to refuse when he offered to help with groceries, but pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Together, they walked into the store. That small act of kindness kept the children fed that day, but it also reminded Beatrice of a terrifying truth. She needed a plan. Weeks passed and survival became a routine. Beatrice woke before dawn, cooked what little she had, walked the children to school, then rushed home to sew clothes for neighbors on her old machine. Her fingers bled, her back ached, but the children ate. That was all that mattered. Then, one afternoon, a knock echoed through the house. Beatrice opened the door to find a woman holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Williams," the woman said calmly, "I'm from Child Protective Services." Beatrice felt the floor drop beneath her feet. The social worker walked through the house, taking notes. The peeling paint, the worn mattresses, the small kitchen. Ethan stepped forward, his voice steady. "Our grandma takes good care of us. We eat, we go to school, she loves us." The woman studied him carefully. After a long silence, she closed her folder. "I'll give you 3 months," she said. "Improve the conditions, stable income, better food, or we'll have to reconsider." When the door closed, Beatrice collapsed into a chair. 3 months. She held her grandchildren close and whispered the same promise again, stronger than before. "No one is taking you away." 3 months. That was all the time Beatrice had to achieve the impossible. And as the night closed in around her, she wondered if love alone would be enough, or if this battle was already lost. The 3-month deadline hung over Beatrice like a shadow that never moved. Days blurred together into exhaustion. She woke before the sun, cooked whatever scraps she could gather, walked the children to school, and returned home to sew until her fingers throbbed and split open. At night, she collapsed into bed, only to wake a few hours later and do it all again. She was losing weight, her hands shook constantly, but she told herself it didn't matter. The children were eating. That had to be enough. Sophia had taken on responsibilities no 8-year-old should carry. She helped dress the younger ones, combed their hair, and wiped away tears she pretended not to feel herself. Caleb and Liam grew quieter, learning to take up less space in the world, and baby Ava had stopped calling for her mother altogether. She called Beatrice Mama now. Every time Beatrice heard it, her heart both broke and healed. One afternoon, while selling handmade clothes at a local market, the heat pressed down on Beatrice like a heavy blanket. She had been standing for hours, her vision blurred, colors bleeding into one another. "How much for the dress?" someone asked. Beatrice opened her mouth to answer, but no sound came out. The ground tilted. She felt herself falling, heard voices shouting. Then everything went dark. When she woke, she was lying in her own bed. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic. Her chest burned. "Don't move," a calm voice said. Dr. Emily Carter from the community clinic stood beside her. "What happened?" Beatrice whispered. "Exhaustion, malnutrition, high blood pressure," the doctor said firmly. "Your body is at its limit." Panic flooded Beatrice. "The children!" she cried. "They're safe," Dr. Carter reassured. "Your neighbor picked them up." Beatrice turned her face toward the wall, shame and fear crashing over her. "I can't stop," she said weakly. "If I rest, they don't eat." The doctor's expression softened, but her voice stayed serious. "If you don't slow down, you won't survive. And then what happens to them?" The words cut deeper than any knife. That evening, Mr. Harrison appeared in the doorway, his thin frame silhouetted by the fading light. Behind him stood Ethan, holding Ava, the other children clinging together like frightened birds. "You're not alone," Mr. Harrison said gently. "You have neighbors, a church, a community." Sophia stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't leave us, Grandma." Beatrice reached out, pulling them all onto the bed, wrapping her arms around them with what strength she had left. "I'm not going anywhere," she promised. "Never." Later that night, when the children were asleep, Mr. Harrison stayed behind. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "I used to teach music for decades." Beatrice looked at him confused. "These children don't just need to survive. They need something beautiful, something to remind them they're more than their pain." He smiled softly. "Let me teach them. No cost, just music." Beatrice felt something stir inside her, something fragile but warm. "Why would you do this for us?" she asked. Mr. Harrison looked down at his hands. "Because my house is too quiet, and because God doesn't give second chances for nothing." The next afternoon, he returned with an old guitar. The children stared at it as if it were a treasure. When Mr. Harrison strummed the first chord, the room filled with sound Beatrice hadn't heard in years. Hope. Ethan's fingers found the strings naturally. Sophia's voice, shy at first, rose clear and strong. Even the younger ones swayed with the rhythm. Beatrice watched from her chair, tears streaming freely. For the first time since Megan left, the house felt alive again. Beatrice didn't know it yet, but that old guitar had just changed everything. What began as a simple act of kindness was about to open a door none of them ever expected, and the miracle was finally taking shape. Music became part of the family's daily rhythm. Every afternoon, right after school, Mr. Harrison arrived with his worn guitar and endless patience. The children waited for him by the window, their faces lighting up the moment they saw him walking up the path. Ethan practiced obsessively. His fingers grew stronger and faster, dancing over the strings with natural ease. Sophia's voice transformed from a timid whisper into something that stopped people in their tracks. Caleb discovered rhythm in everything, pots, tables, even his own heartbeat. Charlotte and Liam learned harmonies, and little Ava clapped along perfectly, as if music had always lived inside her. Beatrice watched it all in quiet disbelief. The music didn't erase their struggles. Bills still piled up, food was still rationed, but the laughter returned. The children smiled again, they slept better, they dreamed. One evening, after a lesson, Mr. Harrison sat heavily in a chair and wiped sweat from his brow. "These kids aren't just good," he said softly. "They're special." Beatrice looked up from her sewing machine. "They're just children." "No," he replied, "they're artists." A week later, Mr. Harrison approached Beatrice with an idea that made her heart pound. "There's a community hall nearby. Holiday party next Saturday. I can get the kids a short performance slot." Beatrice hesitated. "They've never played in front of strangers." "They don't need perfection," Mr. Harrison said gently. "They need a chance." That night, Beatrice told the children over dinner. "Us? On a stage?" Ethan's eyes widened. Sophia stood up suddenly. "I want to sing," she said quietly but firmly. "I want people to know we're more than the kids with no mom." The others nodded, courage spreading between them. The days leading up to the performance were intense. Practice filled every spare moment. Fingers ached, voices grew hoarse, but no one complained. The night of the party, Beatrice dressed them in their cleanest clothes, carefully mended and pressed. She knelt in front of Ethan, straightening his collar. "Don't think about the people," she whispered. "Play from your heart." The community hall buzzed with chatter and clinking plates. When the children walked onto the small stage, they looked impossibly small under the lights. Ethan's hands shook as he struck the first chord. Then Sophia began to sing. The room fell silent. Her voice carried pain, hope, and love all at once, too honest, too real to ignore. Conversations stopped. People turned. Some wiped their eyes. By the final song, the audience was standing. Applause thundered through the hall. The children stared at each other in disbelief. People surrounded them afterwards with hugs, praise, and folded dollar bills pressed into Beatrice's hands. Mr. Peterson, the hall's owner, approached with a smile. "They can play here every weekend," he said. "I'll pay them." Beatrice's knees nearly gave out. For the first time in months, she didn't lie awake calculating how to stretch pennies. That night, the children fell asleep smiling, replaying every moment. Weeks passed and the performances continued. The children grew confident. The money helped. Food on the table, proper shoes, a little breathing room. Then, one afternoon, Ethan came home with a split lip and torn shirt. "They said we were beggars," he muttered, "that no one wants us." Beatrice held his face gently. "She attacks what scares them," she said, "and your strength scares them." That night she gathered the children. You are not abandoned. You are chosen, chosen to rise." Mr. Harrison smiled. "Then let's show the world who you are." He suggested the school spring festival. This time, they wouldn't just play, they would tell their story. The children had found their voice, but soon the world would hear it, and when their story reached beyond their neighborhood, nothing, not even the past, would be able to stop what was coming next. The school courtyard was packed. Parents stood shoulder to shoulder. Children ran between folding chairs, and colorful banners fluttered in the warm spring air. Beatrice stood near the back, her hands clasped tightly, her heart pounding harder than it had in years. This wasn't just another performance. This was the children's story. When the Williams siblings stepped onto the small stage, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some recognized them from community events. Others only saw 6 modestly dressed children standing beside an old man with a guitar. Ethan struck the first chord. Then Sophia began to sing. Her voice carried across the courtyard, clear, strong, and unafraid. She sang of loss, of a mother who walked away, and of a grandmother who stayed. She sang of hunger, fear, and nights filled with tears. But she also sang of love that refused to break and hope that refused to die. Parents stopped talking. Teachers lowered their heads. Even the children who had mocked Ethan stood frozen. When the song ended, silence held the air for a heartbeat. Then the applause erupted. A standing ovation. Beatrice felt her knees weaken as tears streamed down her face. The children hugged each other on stage, laughing and crying at the same time. In that moment, they weren't abandoned kids or poor kids. They were seen. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. Videos of the performance began circulating online. First, hundreds of views, then thousands. Local radio stations called. Community papers wrote stories about the 6 siblings raised by their grandmother. One afternoon, Beatrice answered a phone call that nearly stopped her heart. A music producer wanted to meet them. Beatrice sat at the kitchen table that night, staring at the phone long after the call ended. 2 years ago, she had been counting coins to buy bread. Now, strangers believed her grandchildren had something special. When the producer visited, she listened quietly as the children played. When Sophia sang, tears filled her eyes. These kids don't just have talent, they have truth. An album followed, opportunities followed, but through it all, Beatrice remained firm. School came first, family came first, and home stayed home. The money helped, enough to fix the house, buy instruments, and finally sleep without fear. But the greatest gift wasn't success. It was dignity. One quiet evening, Beatrice found Mr. Harrison sitting by the window, watching the children practice. His breathing was slower now, his smile softer. "They're ready," he said quietly. "For what?" Beatrice asked. "For the world." He took her hand. "You did this." "No," she said firmly, "we did." A few months later, Mr. Harrison passed away peacefully in his sleep. The children played his favorite song at his memorial, their music trembling but strong. Beatrice stood tall that day because she understood something now. Miracles don't always arrive as rescues. Sometimes they arrive as responsibility. Sometimes they arrive as love that refuses to walk away. Years later, when people asked the Williams siblings how it all began, They never talked about fame or music first. They talked about a 70-year-old grandmother who stood in a doorway with $50 and 6 frightened children and chose to stay. Because the greatest miracle wasn't the music. It was her promise. She was never supposed to raise 6 children at 70, but love never asks permission, and when it stays, it changes everything.